Welcome, fellas. We're going to do another live stream. It's the end of my workday, and yes, I'm going to have coffee at 7 o'clock. There's some of you who were asking last time. That's what we're going to be doing. And we're going to be talking a little bit about story structure. So might as well bring those subjects up. And let me bring on my cam for those of you looking at us on Facebook. And we're going to talk. We're going to talk about what you guys have, some latest updates, and the things that people have been doing, and what you guys can be doing to keep busy and also get the best and the most out of your story structure, right? So let me just give you a quick update about what's going on. Obviously, this week is the lockdown with the virus and the craziness and everything, but people like us, artists, can take a big advantage of what's going on because we hopefully have a setup at home, and the time that we have now without the hustle and bustle of being on production, you can take that time and work on your drawings, improve your stories, maybe even do some research and learn a couple of things from many people out there who are offering free and reduced rates on their services, and a lot of like streaming packages and educational stuff. Man, I've been finding some really cool things. Somebody posted, and we also got noticed too, that Robert Valley, one of our good buddies here at Storyboard Art, has posted a lot of his stuff for free, and a lot of his movies and videos and some of his ebooks and stuff. So download the hell out of that stuff. It's great. That guy's amazing. Well, I'll tell you one thing that I've been working on today actually is story structure, and I've been meaning to talk to everybody about this. So, so yeah, I just wanted to mention that. And also, well, what do I mean by story structure? So a lot of you guys who are doing story and story work may not understand that we need to be complete when we're not. It's not just about draftsmanship and having really cool drawings. That's the way that we deliver our stories. Like that's the technique part. But the story structure is really kind of the knowledge that we need to have in order to develop a good story from beginning, middle, and end. And a couple of resources I'm going to throw out to you guys if you don't know it already is check out Robert McKee and the book called Story. I have that back on my bookshelf. Another one that I go to a lot is Blake Schneider's books, Save the Cat. So Save the Cat and Save the Cat Returns and Save the Cat Strikes Back. Those three books I find really, really helpful. Sid Field is also considered one of like the gurus of script writing. So these are all books that you like must reads, right? Like seriously, if you don't know what I'm talking about, go out and buy them. Hopefully there's a digital version. You can just download it so you don't have to wait for anything to come in the mail or any coronavirus to be delivered to your door. You can get the digital version, right? But those books are really must-reads. I would recommend you read Save the Cat first because it's a really fun read. It breaks things down really, really well. And then probably Story by Robert McKee, and then lastly Sid Field, because they get a little more technical as you go in that order, right? Cheers, friends. So, okay, a couple of things on story structure that I think just reminders is that like you need a journey of whatever happens in your story. And story is about change. So nobody wants to watch a story where nothing changes or it's predictable. That's so boring, and that's a recipe for disaster. You're not going to get anybody to watch your movie, anybody to want to watch your story, right? So you need to have a change. You need to track your change. And it's that blunt and it's that basic. So a character changes from the beginning to the beginning of the story to the end of the story. And you need to track that change. And there's ups and downs and peaks and valleys. Literally, like, so what happens is that characters going on a journey, they might have something happen to them that's good, right? And then they keep on that journey, something else that happens to them that's good. But then all of a sudden they get knocked down, somebody shoots them or kills them or they get robbed or whatever happens in your story, they go down. So then there's this up and down curve. But the overall arch of this story has to go from beginning to end. There has to be a change, right? So you usually track this in kind of this curve, and that's where you get into the 3-act structure. And it all builds up to a climax where that character's desire from the beginning of the film or the beginning of the story that you have presented very clearly to your audience, that desire is now fulfilled or denied, right? You don't always have to fulfill the character's desire. But it's as simple as that, and that's really the tenets of storytelling that's been passed down through generations and generations of people, and that's really what you got to do to make the best out of your story. So in planting your structure, let me just give you a couple tips to break this down very easily, and we can get really deep with this. but make sure you understand the change that your character has to go through, okay? What it is. It could be anything. So a character has to learn how to be selfless instead of selfish. A character needs to know how to beat the monster, right? Literally, vest and beat and kill this big demon monster that's coming after him. It's like life and death, right? It's that simple. Either you live or you die, right? Something like that. You can break it down as simple as that. And you track that change, and then you're also going to know that at the beginning of the movie or story, that character behaves a certain way, and at the end of the story, the character is completely different, right? So that basic change is the way you track that, and there's a beginning, there's a middle, and then there's an end. So these are just basic elements. Now I can go into conflicts and the antagonists and the forces of antagonism, which these are all terms that you should be familiar with as a story artist. And it gets really deep because you can have subplots. So there's the main plot and the main thread of your character, let's say. But then there's subplots that either relate or give support to the overall theme of your story, right? And all of these have to be intertwined, and you can literally track this stuff, and there's ways of doing it. And I recommend Robert McKee and Blake Schneider for Save the Cat, because they have a really nice method, and I kind of go by the Save the Cat method of blocking things out in the 3-act structure and knocking it down in beats. And then you hit your marks with the inciting incident, which is basically what puts your story into motion. And then you build on up to a major climax, and then it kind of weaves down to an epilogue and then the end of the story, right? All right, so that's the basic gist of it. If you have no idea what I just rambled on about, well, again, I recommend you take those books. You'll be thoroughly entertained by a book like Save the Cat. And it's the pop culture stuff that we all know, right? So that's the kind of things that you want to get into. In addition to that, there's a lot of drawing that goes into it. All right, so I also want to answer a bunch of questions that I didn't get to yesterday, because we also did a live stream yesterday, which is a lot of fun. So if you guys have any questions, please shout that out there and let me know. I will bring up this shameless plug for those of you guys on Facebook. You'll see the title on screen. It's the Visual Story course. So that's free, completely free. You guys can go to that, and I recommend you take a look. And if you're just getting your feet wet with this, maybe you have some drawing skills, maybe you've done some comics, then you can bring that to the Visual Story course and see how you apply this to a sequential story. So we talk about single panel storytelling images, how to really design that, and it just gets your feet wet, and it's going to get you going. But this isn't a pro way. We don't want to we don't just want to gloss over these things. We want you to really learn that stuff, and we got some community mentors to help you. So check us out. Check out storyboardart.org, and you can see all that information there. You can sign up to that course. All right, so let me dig a little bit deeper into some of the questions that we had before. A lot of people were asking if how you get started and what you need to do to get into the business of story artists. And some of you guys might be coming from comics or the illustration world. You might be coming from maybe graphic design or some other discipline that's related in the art field, and you don't necessarily know how to break down the steps to get into the business here. So really what it comes down to is it's very similar to many other disciplines in that you need to show samples of your work, and you need to start applying to those people who are doing the projects that you want to be working on, right? And you also need to show them that you can tell a complete story with images. So a lot of comic artists are really good at doing this stuff already, because they do comic books. And I think for a lot of story guys, they kind of come in through comics. Maybe they're doing comics in high school and they're just doodling, or they have their own little stories. You read comics as you're growing up, and it's sequential art. But when it comes to becoming a story artist, so to speak, or a visual storyteller, you kind of take it to the next level, because you're doing this with timed out movie sequences, right? We're talking about the extra element of time. In a comic, it's just a printed flat book, and that's great. But the stuff that I've been working on has always been in animation or film, and I love the fact that you can actually time things out, because it really gives the emotional beat. And then that goes back to the story structure, is that you can plot out where your major beats are and your points are in your story. So think about some of the stories that you guys have liked before, right? Some of the most popular things that have come up. Everybody's been binging on Netflix and HBO and stuff. So Game of Thrones. Think about those threads and the story structure, the number of characters they have in that series, right? And how they arc throughout the series. Whether whether they die off, there's still a growth and there's a change from those characters. And what it gets really complicated is when those characters intertwine. And that I think is a real testament to really strong storytelling, that we all relate to some of these characters and we cheer on the ones that we like and we boo the ones that we don't. Stranger Things is another episodic series that takes you on this journey and you're following a series of characters, and there's an overall plot, but then there's also the subplots of each one of these characters, right? So that's all good stuff that we need to know about. A couple of other questions that came up were resources that people were asking about. And I got a whole bookshelf of just great printed resources that people can look at for doing storyboards. And I got some nice feedback from people who have found my book. So if you don't know, I wrote a book on storyboarding. I can't say I wrote the book on storyboard because I learned this stuff from everybody else. This is what I'm doing, what everybody else has done, is you take a compilation of what you learn over the years and you put it into practice. So to me, the way to learn anything, especially at a very high level, is you have to be mentored and guided by other people. This is kind of the reason why storyboard art exists, is so that you have a resource to be able at least to lean on somebody and have a community where you can get some feedback from others. And also, if you want to take it really to the next level and do some personalized things, well, we have courses that you can take, and you can look into that too, right? But you learn this from others. So basically, I wrote a book on this stuff, and that's one resource. You can check out Professional Storyboarding Rules of Thumb. My co-author, Anson Ju, is also a really badass story artist. He's working in LA on some big Hollywood movies. And oh man, 11 Joe, you're awesome. Thanks, Joe. Good to see you, buddy, by the way. Anyway, you lost my train of thought because you you came up. Anyway, I was going to come up with some other references to look at. So visual references, there's a couple ones like Technically Speaking where you can copy from. I like kind of the old school master guys. So look at the classic American illustrators like Norman Rockwell, Dean Cornwell, J.C. Leyendecker, Robert Peake. I like all of these guys. They've done some really great stuff. And that's just really illustration. They were doing storytelling illustrations too, which you can apply to story work and sequential work. But the way they do one graphic image is just so spectacular. And their technical facility as far as draftsmanship and their knowledge of color, composition, anatomy, perspective, proportions, all of that is a great, all right? So check those guys out. And then some of the story structure things, which this is why I mention it. I don't think people mention this enough when it comes to doing visual storytelling, is the writing and the structure part. So writers know about this, creative writing and how to leave an open-ended hook, right? How to come up with a scene, leave it open-ended, and you close that hook later on in a future scene. That's something that written writers and novelists will write and understand how to do. You can also do that visually, right? Think back at some of your favorite films. And I'm pretty sure you're going to find that some of those also had some really cool open and closed hooks in there. So yeah, this structure part is really very, very important piece when it comes to developing your stories, understanding how to plant that out, and really kind of take advantage of the knowledge that we've all collected as human beings throughout the years, right? There's so much history in storytelling just with the human race, okay? So yeah, what are some of your questions that you guys have about it? Let me know and we'll go ahead and answer that. And if we don't get to it here, which we missed a couple last time, I'll get to that as soon as we can. So another couple things that come up often is like when it comes to technical facility and the actual execution of the storyboard, right? And so you talk all about structure and how you plan things out, and you might outline your sequences in beats, like this happens first, characters enters the scene, he has a couple lines of dialogue with the other character, maybe they go to the kitchen, they walk to another location, and you plot this out in beats, and each one of those beats will represent something visually. So you do that, but then how do you actually technically show those things? So for each one of those beats, what you're going to have to do is make a visual representation, and this is where it comes in, where you actually have to draw this. And you do this and it comes out in shots, right? So you create a composition for each one of those beats. That's the start of it, right? And this compositions that you're going to make will have to be storytelling compositions. So visually looking at the composition, can you tell what's going on in the story at that given moment? If it's just a bunch of characters standing there doing nothing, then you haven't really done your job as a visual storyteller. So you have to show characters through action showing what that storytelling beat is. So let's imagine a scenario where you have a character walk into the room, like I just said. He meets another character. They're going to have a dialogue exchange. So what are these characters doing? Are they eating at the kitchen table? Are they cooking, near the stove? Are they sitting down just at a chair, at the table right next to each other? Or are they in conflict? Are they actually fighting? And while they're having their discussion. All of these things should relate to what's going on in the scene, and there should be a point to that scene that that meets the story beat that you need in the film. Every scene has to have a conflict, right? There has to be a point to that scene, otherwise you cut it, get rid of it. It's not any good to the story. It's just extra fluff. So every scene has to push the story forward, and every scene has to have a conflict. Yeah, very important. All right, let me run through some of these questions here. Cool. All right. So this one on Instagram, Wasm Legit. Hopefully, what seems legit, I think, is how you pronounce that. Do you have any advice about creating establishing shots or strong layouts in your boards? Yes, absolutely. Okay. So let me give you the standard thing that happens with your establishing shot. Is you have a scene just like the one I told you, two characters coming into the room, and the first thing you're going to think of doing is doing a really wide establishing shot, kind of a map view of every character in the room. That's the default thing. That will serve the purpose, and that works. But I always like to challenge people when it comes to doing these kind of story images to come up with an establishing shot that is unique and that you're going to remember. And also remember that you can do this with a camera move. The camera is your tool that will bring you into the scene. So even a simple camera move where you're pushing in that opening shot and you're getting closer to the action, that will bring the audience in there to that scene. So think of that. So it doesn't always have to be a high shot. It can be the camera low on the ground and it's still wide so you see everything that goes on there, but it's just a variation of stuff. You can also do a combination thing with an establishing shot. So you can start close on something intimate, right? Like you start on this coffee mug, and then the camera moves and all of a sudden it pans across the room and it widens up and you see the whole room. But you started on somebody, let's say, carrying a cup of coffee, right? And so that would make more visual interest when you're doing that. So don't just think of like the top-down overhead view, wide, high-angle shot for your establishing shots. You can do a number of things to make it really unique and interesting, okay? So that's one of the things I think you should think about when doing establishing shots. Now, as far as strong layouts, the thing that I say, and I repeat a lot because it's something you really have to drive into your memory, is this idea of doing a foreground, middle ground, and background and creating depth. So that's one question you should always ask yourself. If you're doing your compositions, does it have depth? Is there enough depth in your composition? And one way to do it is by adding a foreground element, a middle ground element, and a background element. That'll just automatically give you depth if you do those three things. Now, you don't always have to have that, but that's a good start, right? So depth, that's something you really want to do, okay? Cool, great questions. All right, let me take another one from Instagram here. This one from Samit Mandre. Okay, how do you rethink in different perspective parameters after you take one of a storyboard and you kind of like it? So, okay, let's say you do a couple of versions and let's say you like some of the shots that you're doing. Now, how do you do different versions of that shot? Is that basically what you're asking? Let me give you my take on that. So when you conceptualize a shot, you're always going to have like kind of the first idea, like the first 1, 2, and 3. And I call these ideas like A, B, and C, that they pop into your head, okay? Those to me are the default ideas. That's usually what is first in your memory for whatever pop culture references that you have, or maybe just your own personal tastes when it comes to creating a shot. What I encourage everybody to do is to do versions A, B, and C as your first ones, and then do D, E, F, G, and just keep on going down and doing at least 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different versions of the camera at different angles for that same shots till you get something that feels correct and unique for that particular moment, right? So let me explain that a little bit more. So if you have a shot and you have some cool perspective and you might like it, and even if that's the one you choose in the end, what you still want to do is just a little thumbnail sketch and try different variations. Put the camera up high, then do another variation with the camera low. Can you put the characters right next to the camera and you do an over the shoulder shot as a variation? So these are all things that you just want to try out and just look at them and see if it's going to work with the sequence that you have. That's one method of, if you're stuck and you don't really you're thinking of trying to do some more creative ideas there, then that's one way to break it down and actually get at it, right? The other thing to keep in mind when you're doing that is yes, you might like your first take at it. And if that is correct, what happens is the rest of the shots seem to flow. Because you know that, like, let's say you establish a character, he comes into the room, you really like the way you drew that, but then you need to cut to the second character, so you know you're going to have to do a camera angle that's probably about character height, and then it shows off a medium close-up of the character, and then you just go into over-the-shoulder shots of the two characters interacting, right? There's like a logical series of shots that you can do in any given situation. But the point is just to keep trying and doing variations, do little sketches on the side until you get the ones that you really like, okay? Awesome, these are all really cool questions. And thank you guys for hanging out. I want to take just a couple more minutes and then we'll call this one, because I like these stories chats. We'll just keep them nice and brief. But this one is from Mike's Art. Okay, my weakness seems to always be when it comes to composition. What's a good rule of thumb when it comes to making strong stage composition? Any book recommendations? So far I have 5 C's of Cinema, right? So 5 C's of Cinematography, highly recommend that book. That book is actually really awesome. I reread that book just recently. And all these things of depth, like what I'm talking about, I'm not just making this up. I don't know if I read that book first and then I came up with these tenets of depth, or somebody else told me this and then I started doing it and then I read that book and it said the same thing. Like the 5 C's of Cinematography is from, I have it on my bookshelf here. I forgot the name of the author, but he's like a super badass director of photography, classic cinema director. And he breaks down what you need to know for creating really awesome composition. So some of the things I just mentioned: foreground, middle ground, background. You create depth, okay? The other thing that I see a lot of is that people tend to have really poor variety in their camera choices. So you can do wide, medium, and close, right? Those are your 3 camera setups that you can basically do. But within that, you can put the camera up high, you put the camera down low, you can move the camera in there. And when creating strong compositions, think of something unique. The other thing you want to do is tilt your camera lens. You can always just tilt your camera, and you can tilt it maybe 5 degrees. Like, it doesn't have to be that much of a tilt, but that off-kilter feeling will create visual interest and really make your composition stick out. So the other thing to keep in mind is the shapes in your composition. That's something you want to always look and see, and this is a rule of thumb that I throw out there, is don't have any 2 shapes in your composition the same size at any time, right? So hopefully that made some sense. So you don't want 2 equal size shapes in your composition. Let's say I have 2 fists here, right? So if I put one closer to the camera, all of a sudden this fist is bigger than the one in the background. So now you have 2 similar shapes, but one is bigger than the other, right? As simple as that. You're going to draw them that way, okay? So that goes with characters. A lot of people put characters in their compositions, and they're all the same lineup and the same distance from the camera, and they all look about the same height. So you can stagger your characters closer to the camera and further away from the camera. That'll give you some depth. Any book recommendations for that? Yeah, I got a ton on my bookshelf here. I would recommend, I think it's called, Dream Worlds by Hans Bacher. Check that book out. In fact, you can go to Storyboard Art and check out the book resources that we have there. So storyboardart.org, and go up top, and there's a link for some resources, and click on books, and that'll send you to Amazon or some of the books that we have for sale on our site. And yeah, those books that we have there for composition and storytelling and everything else are just highly recommended because they're things that you're going to use all the time, right? So check those out. That's always really, really cool. All right, awesome question. All right, let me see. Yeah, let me go through that actually some other book recommendations that I can think of to get you guys on the right foot. Now, of course, I come from classic animation and I used to be a 2D animator. And one book that you might be surprised to know and read as a story artist, but it's pretty valuable, is The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ole Johnson, because that one is it gives the tenets of 2D animation, but it really gives tenets of strong storytelling and strong staging and strong posing. And of course, it's got all the glory stories of the Disney people back in the day, which I find really fun to read as well. But The Illusion of Life is a really strong book when it comes to theory because they break it down as far as appeal, good posing, silhouettes, all that stuff you need to know, okay? And that'll help you, like, yeah, like Mike Art's saying there too, is like avoid the symmetry and just like twinning, they talk about that. So it's a really big like coffee table book, and you might be able to download a digital version of it, or there might be a PDF floating around somewhere. Um, so yeah, a lot of these references I've just collected over the years. Five C's of Cinematography that you guys have mentioned before. Oh, awesome. Yeah, thanks, Joe. Framed Ink is a really great book. Trying to think of what else that I've learned from composition. Uh, one thing that you might want to do, and we mentioned this, I think it was just yesterday in copying films, is just bring up your favorite movies and freeze frame your movies. Hopefully you can do this on Netflix too, and you just watch it. If you like a composition, just freeze it and just sketch it. Now it might seem weird that you're copying something that's already been like filmed and done, but the more you do this, you're going to be surprised at how they frame their characters. And so I'll give you some movie recommendations for that. One that I saw recently, which is an awesome classic, is Once Upon a Time in the West by another awesome Sergio Leone. and and so yeah, check out that movie and just freeze frame it. I think every single shot is like so beautifully composed. And there's an infinite list of really awesome films. I think just everyone has them. Just like look through your library or pick the ones that you remember and watch them again, and literally freeze frame and with the sketchbook in hand start drawing these things, and then you'll build up a visual memory of what makes good composition or not. So there's a big difference between Wes Anderson films and Stanley Kubrick films, right? But you can learn a lot from both. Like Wes Anderson has a really unique way of doing flat staging and having very cool but asymmetrical and flat but very unique compositions. And by flat, I mean that the staging is shallow, right? There's shallow staging versus deep staging. And if you watch these films, you'll know what I mean. Because Kubrick is using the whole cinema and just this, he creates this expansive world, and he's a real master at cinematography and camera work. So that's something really cool there. All right, let me see if let me get to a couple last questions here, and I think we'll call it for tonight. All right, so how many story sequences? This one is from Artefrage. How many story sequences should you have in your portfolio? Yeah, and this also, there's a technical question from yesterday, I think, too, but I'll answer that in a second. So the story portfolio, that varies a lot, and we had a mentorship group like last season where we talked a lot about this, and I have my take on it, and it depends on the studios that you're applying for, but let me give you a couple like rules of thumb. You should at least have 3 to 5 sequences of different scenes in your portfolio that show your storytelling and show your sequential art. Okay, so you could have a dramatic scene, you might have 2 of those. If you're going for an action show, you might have an action scene, maybe a couple of those as well. You also want to throw in a comedy scene and maybe, maybe something else that would kind of round out your portfolio. So comedy, drama, and action, those are kind of 3 big ones. And you can also do snippets, so it doesn't have to be this full elaborate thing. You can do a section of an action moment, which would take up a couple of pages in your portfolio, but you're showing off your perspective, you're showing off how your characters interact, your staging, unique story solutions to that particular problem. So if you have a bar fight, for example, and you boarded this out, if it's just a boring fight with two characters just standing there, uh, you know, it's not that exciting. You want to put something that's really awesome in your portfolio. So if you have a fight and you're in a bar, I mean, think of all the amazing things that you can do. They can jump over the bar, they can grab bar stools and hit each other. There's a dartboard, they can throw darts at each other. They grab the pool sticks and they smash them. They throw cue balls. There's so many things in a bar that you can do that would create visual interest. And those are the kinds of things that you want to put in your portfolio. Okay, I'm just talking about it for an action scene. You also want to show samples of character acting and emotion. Emotional beat is really what it's all about. Um, all right, so I think I'm going to end it here, and some of the questions that we didn't get to, we'll get to that probably in the next session, and I'll keep up to date on all this. Well, thanks for joining me, and keep on it. So those of you guys who are doing freelance and maybe who are just hanging out because work has dried up because of this kind of shutdown that's going on globally, hang tight. Use this time to improve yourself and to keep working on the stuff that you're doing. And then when things pick up again, you'll have more samples to show. You'll have more things that are actually going to attract clients to you, and you're actually going to land more jobs because you took advantage of the time here of doing that. All right, friends, thanks for hanging out, and I'll put the title back up on for the visual story course for those of you guys on Facebook, and we'll also repost this stuff to YouTube if you want to check it out again. All right, thanks, take care, we'll talk soon.